Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Don Bridges, and I'm with Jana. And on behalf of Jana, would like to, maybe for the next half hour, 45 minutes, go over with you the subject of creating and delivering CMMs in ATA iSpec 2200. Just to give you a little bit of background about who the speakers are today. As I mentioned, I'm Don. I manage Jana's consulting business and have been toiling in the XML world for, gosh, 20 years, maybe a little more than that. Also joining me is Stefan Johns. Stefan is our Director of Technology Development and has about 15 years in aviation tech pubs. Stefan, wanted if we could do a quick mic check. Are you with us?
I'm here in the flesh.
All right, perfect. Stefan is joining us from the home office of Jana, which is in Universal City, just outside of San Antonio, Texas. Just a little bit about Jana. Coming up on, boy, if my math is quick, 45 years working with technical information, both in the technical writing, engineering, and consulting group. We employ roughly 170 tech writers and graphics illustrators and do a lot of work in the aerospace industry. Just about every major carrier, many of the OEMs use Jana in some way, shape, or form. A couple of housekeeping items. Henry, can you confirm that we are recording the webinar?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. All of your lines are muted. If you have a question, I'd ask that you use the chat function, and we'll answer your questions at the end. We're expecting that the webinar itself, the presentation, will go right up to the bottom of the hour, so we can see how well we do on that mark. And then we'll address your questions. We're guessing that's maybe another 10 minutes. Henry confirmed that we are being recorded. We will send you a link to the webinar, and it will be posted on our webinar page. So speaking of our webinar page, 2 weeks ago today, we did the sister presentation to this, and it was about creating and delivering CMMs in S1000D. And there is the link posted at the bottom of the page. That's also where this webinar will find itself once we get that recorded. My understanding is that this webinar on S1000D will be available first of next week, and we would expect this one, if you want to share it, will be available. Otherwise, there's no registration required, and you can access that at your convenience, share it at your convenience, and hopefully you'll find that information helpful. So what you're going to learn, hopefully over the next 30 minutes, is what a iSpec 2200 system looks like, and what you'll need to know to go figure out what is the right solution for you. Now, there are many ways to go create ATA content. You can use a hosted tool. You can use an on-premise tool. You can have it converted. You can continue to write it in Word or FrameMaker and go about your way and then convert it. That's certainly another option. So there's multiple ways, and the objective here is to kind of help you find out what are areas that you might want to go look at closer. I've provided a link to the what is called the Air Transport Association web page. I think it's changed the name of it a little bit, but if you go to that link, that will tell you, okay, here's where you can get all of the standards that go with ATA iSpec 2200. It's a big one. It's broken out into many components. For instance, AMMs have a separate data model than CMMs, and they're all listed there. I'll also give a short disclaimer. Just because we mention a tool doesn't mean that we endorse it. We want to provide options. Certainly, we think there are tools that are maybe more suitable in industry and others that are maybe less suitable for both technical and business reasons. But at the end of the day, the decision is based on your situation, your business needs, your requirements. So just because we list it doesn't mean it's great. certainly doesn't mean it's horrible. They all have found some market share. So from a agenda perspective, what we would like to do is go over how we see things now. What is the current situation? Why is ATA iSpec something that's happening? Go over a little bit of what a system looks like from a technology stack. Talk about what your options are for suppliers, and I'm expecting that most of the folks on the call are suppliers. And what are the unique challenges that you need to be aware of? And if you want to call those FAQs, that's fine. And then we'll wrap things up with your questions and answers. So what I would like to do next is have a brief survey. Henry, if you could administer that and launch the survey screen.
All right, here we go.
Okay. And basically, if you could take a moment and let us know what technology your organization currently uses to create CMMs. Is it Word? Is it FrameMaker? Is it one of the XML editors? Or is it something else? So Henry, when we get the responses kind of leveled off, if you could let me know where we're at. Yeah, if you joined the S1000D webinar 2 weeks ago, we played the Jeopardy question, but I guess in retrospect, I kind of thought that was maybe a little cheesy. So, Henry, do we get any responses?
Looks like we've got about 80% for Microsoft Word and and 20% for Adobe FrameMaker.
Okay, very good. So let's see if you'll turn the poll off. Close the poll.
All right.
All right. So this is maybe a little bit of a premonition, but what we experience, JANA experience, is that most CMMs are authored in Word or Adobe FrameMaker. They're set up from a template perspective to mimic what I'll call an ATA 100 look and feel. Invariably, they're saved on a file system and published to and delivered as Adobe PDF. I hope most of you out there nodding your head and go, yep, that sounds a lot like us. And I'll add that most airframes that are in use today, except for the newest, are using an ATA 2200 system in place. And some of those desire CMMs, and I'm calling that third-tier supplier content, to be plug and play with their content, which basically is, if it's an iSpec system, it's using iSpec 2200. So instead of having to rekey, or if they're going to go integrate your content into their content, short of retyping it, they prefer it to be in the same standard format. Which gets us to a very, very, very wordy slide. So I'll apologize for that. This is taken from the ATA iSpec 2200 webpage that I provided the link to earlier. And basically, it's a way to go. The reason that it was done was to basically have a standard look and feel, and presentation was really the focus on ATA 100. 2100 is to go make it more of a SGML system for data interchange, and 2200 is kind of the marriage of 100 and 2100. So going back, and this is I hate to say a 10-year-old slide, but we've been playing ATA 100 since the late 80s, and then in 2100 for a few years in the mid-90s, and then for roughly 15 years we've been in this ATA 2200 world. So a little formula at the bottom. What is ATA 2200? It's actually 100 presentation, 2100 interchange, and then a whole bunch of other minor changes that occurred over time. So why did we go to iSpec 2200? And basically, there's two main reasons. One is, as I've mentioned, the plug and play aspects, so that your content or anyone's content can be loaded into an OEM and in some cases an operator system and utilized. And the other is from a delivery perspective. One of the neat things about SGML or XML is that I can deliver it to PDF. I can deliver it to a mobile device. I can have an interactive electronic tech manual or a third-party app. It's a very extensible, it's the X in XML, or repurposable content format. I can deliver it in many, many different ways. So Stefan, maybe I have talked enough for a few minutes, and maybe give us some insight to what is in a typical iSpec 2200 technology stack, and you can add the color and clarity to this side.
All right, thanks, Don. So typically there's two types of technology stacks when it comes to iSpec 2200. You have your coupled system and your decoupled system. In a coupled system, that's just a fancy word to say that all the tools that are used to modify the documents are all nestled into one package. So basically, if you're in a coupled system, that system owns your data. You never have to go out and purchase any other supplementary tools to modify your content. However, in a decoupled system, you have several components that all work together for the common good. In most cases, you're going to have a CMS that does all the managing of the files. You're going to have an XML editor that helps the tech writer conform to the iSpec specification in accordance with the DTDs and or schemas. And you're also going to have a graphics editor which takes care of all of your illustration needs. Those three components kind of work together to, at the end of the day, meet the desired results. It packages all the deliverables up. It delivers them to the top tier, which is usually an OEM, Boeing, Airbus, etc.
So, Stefan, taking that a step further is comparing that to what is in a typical technical information technology stack. And this is a slide that I've used not necessarily for ATA or not necessarily, this is a kind of a generic slide of what is the world of technical information. And you'll notice a lot of similarity between this slide. I've moved it or shuffled it around a little bit, but you can create or revise content. You can check it in and check it out of a storage or content management system that, and oh, by the way, you may have conversion of legacy content feeding that storage system. And then you deliver it. As I said, most people currently deliver in PDF this type of information, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't deliver the native XML files. And then somehow, some way, invariably, you get feedback which addresses your revisions. Now, I'm going to maybe, a lot of people use a file server system, and the purpose of this presentation was not to talk about content management systems, but I think it's important and worthwhile to mention that we're big proponents of content management systems for a couple of very basic reasons. Access control, who is allowed to go work with your information. In some organizations, that's important. Check in and check out so that two people are not editing the same content at the same time, and then you've got to go resolve those differences. Revision control, if you want to say, what did, because of a legal liability issue or because of some other historical perspective, you say, what did this CMM look like 3 years ago? With a content management system, you can go do that. Content management systems invariably have a workflow component, and by that, there's an approval process kicking off from the time that an engineering document changes, or there's feedback from the field saying, hey, this source file that the CMM is based off of had some changes to it. Do you want to go incorporate this into the CMM to approve all the way through the approval process, all the way through the delivery process, whether it's being delivered as PDF, native XML, or as HTML on your website? And then finally is search capability that we are big proponents of metadata and faceted search, and invariably CMSs have a much better search capability to go find that nugget of information that you're looking for that in a file server system is much harder to go find. So that's just a word about content management systems. Stefan, maybe we can toss it back to you and kind of walk us through kind of a typical ATA 2200 process, which I'm going to bet is very similar to a Word or FrameMaker process.
Very similar with the exception of the parsing piece. So this slide shows the 3 different swim lanes that's typical in a ATA 2200 process. You have the OEM, which is usually Airbus, Boeing, Gulfstream, etc. You have the engineering, that's the department where all your source material, usually where your change drivers are going to come from. And you obviously you have the tech puffs department where all the data is created and or revised. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the differences is the parsing piece. Now that we're developing documents in a structured environment, we have a concept called parsing. What parsing does, it says that does the data that you created align with that DTD? Now, obviously, or schema. Now, obviously, you could manually do it without some sort of tool. However, I wouldn't advise that. There's always room for human error. But there's the concept of parsing. And what parsing does is it aligns your content with that DTD and or schema programmatically to validate whether or not you conform. The next component after it's parsed is the delivery mechanism. Most ATA processes still deliver a PDF, but in some cases they're looking for either the HTML instance themselves or some sort of low-level item, which is an interactive electronic tech manual, delivered to the OEM. Now, once that CMM is delivered, it's usually up to the OEM to accept your content or give you feedback so that you can correct your errors and return the product back to the OEM.
Thank you, Stefan. Maybe one other thing that you can walk through, and as people by the initial poll had said they're currently in Word or in FrameMaker, and there's really 2 options out there. There's the ATA iSpec, which is actually monolithic SGML, and then there's S1000D, which I think a lot of people have heard of if you weren't with our webinar last week. It's more of a modular, a chunked data model that you assemble chunks to get the right. How do you get from a Word, or what do you suggest is going from Word or FrameMaker to modular XML? Is a deep dive, jumping into the deep end of the pool better, or more of a staggered approach? Your thoughts on that?
Typically, we advise our customers to take more of a staggered approach, simply because the paradigm shift from Word to a structured environment, it's simply just a vast void of space in between the two. So we typically take the stepped approach, wherein if you're in a Word environment or you're in a FrameMaker environment, let's take FrameMaker for an example, you can still author data in that FrameMaker environment, which most folks are already used to, and still conform to the iSpec 2200 via plugins or other third-party components that you can add to FrameMaker to meet that model, as opposed to just jumping straight into the deep end, and now you're having to deal with all these new concepts, all these new terms, terms like tagging or parsing, data dispatch notices, things of that nature. It's just too overwhelming for most customers to just jump right into the deep end. Anything else on this one, Don?
No, I think you're spot on. I think, one of the things that we typically talk about is technology, and the technology is great, allows you to go, it's very powerful, allows you to go apply tags to specific parts, but taking the 2 steps, one, you've got 2 degrees of separation between a Word CMM and a S1000D CMM. And so taking that 1 step at a time, I think you're right. Has a lot of value in making those steps smaller and making the digestion or that roadmap from where you're at to where you're going to probably be in 5 years, which is that modular XML kind of data model. So what are the options? And really, there's 3 that we see. I mean, does this cover all the options? No. But these are probably the 3 main ones. One is you can continue to go write in CMM and in Word or in FrameMaker and convert them to SGML. And ATA iSpec is SGML, which gives you a lot of flexibility as what the tag set is. XML is a more limited tag set. You can't do some things in XML that you can in SGML. SGML is a superset of XML. But if you wanted to go convert it, yeah, you could go do that. You would use your current process. You don't have to have any training. You don't have to have any IT support. But every time that you want to go convert that page, nominal $10 a page is probably as good a guess as any. And then with what makes an ATA iSpec system simple, if I can go use that, is the biggest component is the XML editor. And there are really 2 ways to go do that. One is a editor that you install on site, and we'll show you some of the options in the next slide, and the coupled and the uncoupled option. And then you can have a hosted solution. And by the hosted solution, I mean that basically your XML editor is cloud-based, and you're paying a subscription. So every year you have to have that payment. You have to go look and say, where's the work going to be performed? In all cases, obviously, well, if you have the XML editor, you're doing it on site. Where is the data located? Hosted, it's typically cloud-based or off-site. What is turnaround time? Conversion months, I guess, for a lot of CMMs, it could be months, maybe weeks. It's certainly weeks, but maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration for the turnaround time for conversion of months. The process of workflow, as we showed a couple slides back, probably very similar to what you're familiar with now. Are there training impacts? Are there IT support impacts? You can go figure that out. Now, just to be clear, if you're using an XML editor, there's probably the issue of style sheets, meaning how do you go take XML and create PDF? It's using a technology called style sheets. And then training to go understand how to go use the tool. Those are separate. We can talk about those if you have a question about that. What are the tool options? Mostly what I'm listing here is what I'll loosely call the uncoupled solution for XML editors. I will and should mention that both Flatiron's Juve and PTC offer that bundled solution that includes the repository, includes the delivery engine to go deliver them, where the FrameMaker, the Oxygen, the XMetal, and the Mecon, which is a plugin for FrameMaker set up for ATA. Those are all the XML editor components. And then you can also buy a subscription and have Oxygen as a hosted solution. Anything else about this one, Stefan, that you want to add? Or that cover?
Yeah, and I believe Mecon has a piece to where it's a coupled solution together as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but great. So maybe, Stefan, just before we wrap things up, a couple of things that you've seen, what makes iSpec, working with iSpec, different than working with Word, or it sounds like most of the people are in Word or FrameMaker.
Right. So in those desktop publishing systems, Word, FrameMaker, etc., what those tech writers are used to seeing is what they're used to. It's kind of what you see is what you get type of authoring. Whereas in XML, you're not going to see how it's going to look when it's published. You're looking at the raw content, because the concept of structured data is that separation from text and presentation. So you're just looking at the pure text in XML. You also have a concept called what we'll call DTD or schema. Those are all the rules that say that this particular tag goes in this particular order, and this is the frequency that that tag can appear. And then I just talked about the separation of the content and the style sheets. Well, the style sheets is what generates the presentation. The good thing about having style sheets is that your documents will always be spot on and consistent across all your manual sets. Graphic standards. I think the recommendation from the iSpec 2200 is the CGM format or the Group 4 TIFFs. However, those are loose standards. It's not a strict rule. You can use JPEGs, you can use PNGs, you can use whatever. However, if you're working with Boeing or you're working with Airbus, they have their own governance as far as what standard graphics they want their illustrations to be in.
Yeah, Stefan, that's a good point in that invariably, while you can go through the ATA website that I had on the second or third slide and go by the DTD, which is basically the XML template, if you'll think of it that way. On top of that, Boeing or Airbus or your who you're providing the content to, they may have their own nuances or specifications above and beyond or instead of what ATA is requesting. So it looks like I did a halfway decent job of wrapping up at the bottom of the hour. We'll turn this over to Henry if there's any questions. Before we launch into those, here is how you can get in touch with Stefan and myself. And I say this in all candor, we too like feedback. If you like the presentation, please let me know. And you can do that as simple as, in the chat, boy, you guys are great, or boy, you guys stunk it up, or something in between. And if you didn't like the presentation, let us know. You probably won't hurt our feelings, and it'll make for helping us to help you. So without any further pause, Henry, are there any questions from the audience that people have used the chat function to ask a question?
Actually, we do have a few questions for both of you guys, so I'll just start off with the first one. Where do you think the industry will be in 5 years? ATA, iSpec 2200, or S1000D? And Don or Stefan, who would like to take that one?
Well, you want to go, Stefan?
I'll give it a shot.
Sure.
So S1000D is a program-driven specification, meaning that if you're an OEM manufacturing airplanes, you're going to dictate whether or not you want it to be S1000D or ATA. Case in point is the A350. That's an S1000D platform. If you're delivering data to that aircraft, you will be forced to do it in S1000D. So from that standpoint, any new aircrafts coming on board or coming online, more than likely will be in S1000D. So that's where I see it being in the next 5 to 10 years.
So, Stefan, just maybe a little bit of clarity there, and I'll ask you this question. In 5 years, would you expect that basically all new airframes will be S1000D, or there'll still be some folks delivering and I realize this is your opinion, not that of Boeing, Airbus, Bombardier, Embraer, or anyone else?
Right, yeah, I see all new airplanes coming on board being S1000D platforms.
Okay. Henry, any others?
Here's question number 2 regarding SharePoint. We already have SharePoint. Sorry about that. We already have SharePoint. Will that work as a CMS? Don, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. The answer is yes. I think SharePoint handles chunks of data or bits of data as blobs or as their own. It really isn't an XML aware system, but it does a fine job of handling blobs. And of content, and ATA 2200 is a monolithic structure, so it will handle that. It starts at the beginning and ends in the end and has everything in the middle. Whereas something, would SharePoint handle S1000D? The answer is no. At least not well, not without making a lot of changes. You basically need what's called a component content management system in a modular world, or an S1000D world, a CSDB. But for monolithic XML data models, sure, SharePoint works fine. It has tremendous workflow capabilities, and if you're a Microsoft, your IT has a Microsoft bias, you may already have SharePoint installed. Henry, any others?
Thanks, Don. Let's go with another one regarding security. What keeps someone from changing an XML file that we deliver? Who would like to take that one?
Stefan, you want to take a shot at that? Or I can.
Yeah. You can take a stab at that one.
All right, sure. So I've heard from people that say, boy, we deliver PDF because people can't change them, which if it's a full text PDF, yeah, you probably can. But in XML, yeah, sure, somebody can go change a file, but this is one of the reasons that we like a content management system, is it can track and say, here's what we delivered. And it's a very straightforward, I won't say easy, but it's a very straightforward, it is easy, but it's a straightforward process to go compare XML files, to go see exactly what the difference is between two XML files. So you can very clearly say, here is what we delivered, and here's what you had, and here's what you changed. So, can you keep people from changing your files? Even in PDF, the answer realistically is no. You might think you can't change PDF, but you can. And XML, it's very easy to go say, here's what the diff is. Here's what we delivered as verified in our content management system, and here's what you changed. And it's so from a deliverable perspective, I think it's really no different than delivering PDF. And oh, by the way, if you really want to go deliver PDF with an XML-based content, easy peasy. And a matter of fact, it's very automated. And a matter of fact, you can make your content much more consistent looking. And this is one of the reasons for XML and SGML in general, is that it lends itself to a much more consistent delivery of information. So, anything else, Henry?
The next one is regarding CMMs. We have different levels of CMMs. How can we address that in the ATA iSpec 2200?
Ooh, that's a tough one, Stefan. That's yours.
Yeah, I'll get that one. So it is achievable, and I've seen it done a couple of different ways. So obviously the first way is that you can manage them as 3 separate manuals for the different levels of maintenance. Or the other way, which is probably a better solution, is to manage the data in smaller chunks. That way, if you're building a level 3 manual, you can grab those pieces that you need and do a publish. And the same thing goes for level 2s and level 1s. Ideally, because we're dealing with monolithic documents, you can keep it as one big file and add metadata to the areas where you want just to only level 3 readers to see or level 2 readers to see. You add that metadata so that when you go to publish your document, it filters out the information based on the parameters that you set before you hit publish. So if you want to just see a level 3 maintenance book, boom, you select that as your parameter, and it prints out and it knows what to filter and what to keep in. That's the ideal way. That's the way I would do it if I had a choice.
So the data is all there, but depending on what level of CMM, you can select that in the output process to say, okay, I want to go output a level 3 versus output a level 1. Is that
exactly? You can build in that filtering when you're authoring. That way, when you go to publish, you get what you want.
Great. Oh, cool. Henry, any more?
That was awesome. We've got only one more question for you guys. How much does a style sheet cost?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, and it really depends on how wild and crazy you want to get with your style sheet. Certainly, if you're basically using a vanilla presentation, meaning an ATA 100-ish presentation, and maybe only want to apply things like your logo on the first page and some very basic things that could be anywhere from, Stefan, does this sound right, 10 to 15,000? And if you really want to get crazy, 20,000. Are those kind of realistic numbers based on your experience?
Yeah, in that ballpark, yes. Okay.
So, it really depends on what you want, but those are maybe kind of good-ish numbers.
And it also depends on the type of output you're looking for. So obviously, the numbers you just discussed for PDF outputs, if you're looking for something a little bit more advanced, such as an item presentation, the cost goes up a little bit more.